themselves on Zoom. Look at Soup Box, an opportunity to themselves too. And if you can speak up, just as so they can hear you on Zoom. So Dan, go ahead and start please.
Hi, everyone. My name's Dan Sondach, and I'm a restoration ecologist with Preserves and
Ken Flynn, restoration ecologist with Lake County Forest Preserve.
Matt Evans, I'm in the Chicago City. I manage the forest preserve there. Matt Ainsley.
Nick Fuller, Forest Preserve District of DuPage County, Natural Resource Project Coordinator.
GVI Ireland.
Jimmy Anderson, retired.
Jim Sutton, volunteer citizens for conservation.
Mary Portman, landscape ecologist with Open Lands.
Ted Hafner, goal lead for the climate team for Chicago Wilderness Alliance.
Joshua Karen, project coordinator at Santa.
And Travis Wilton, Natural Resources Coordinator with Coastal Management.
Nice to meet you in person, Bill.
I know, I feel like it's seen all this, you guys.
Yep. So anybody online want to go ahead and introduce themselves too? Cassie, let's start with you.
Hey, Cassie, sorry, project manager at the Chicago Park District Natural Areas.
Casey Sullivan. Okay, how about Blake?
Hi, I'm Lake Schulke. I'm with the Chicago Wilderness Alliance. I'm the program assistant and I work mainly in communications, but yeah.
Glad to have you here. How about Mark Johnston?
Hi, yeah, I'm the lead GIS analyst for Field Museum, and I work on CW Hub.
Becky?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Becky Collings. I'm the senior resource ecologist with the Forest Preserves of Cook County.
Okay, how about you, Andrews?
Hello, I'm Andrew Pishka. I am the operations manager for Magnolia Land Partners.
Oh, nice to have you join us. Jess Rudnick.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jessica Rudnick with the U.S. Forest Service as a research social scientist.
Fabulous. Patrick.
Hi, good morning. Patrick Chess. I'm the Director of Natural Resources with the Forest Preserve District of Kane County.
Okay, and let's see. How about Casey, you want to try again? And then I think that's it.
Sure, Casey Sullivan, technically lost, Argonne National Laboratory. Thank you.
Thanks, Casey. I'm going to turn it over to Laura, who has CWA updates for us all.
Thank you. We're looking forward to having everyone join us at Congress on November 15th at Purdue University Northwest in Hammond. Our call for proposals is open now, and our focus this year is building a resilient region through partnerships. And I really invite you all to look at all of the work that you're doing in the region and think about putting a proposal in to really help showcase this amazing work. Hot off the press, you don't even know this yet, but we are extending the deadline for the call for proposals till May 10th. So it was due May 3rd, but you have an extra week, and I'm happy to answer questions. Ted's happy to answer questions, and happy to look at how we can build a strong Congress that really helps us all learn how to do this work better together. And when we talk about partnerships and we talk about this way to build a climate resilient region, it can be partnerships at all levels. It can be how you are in the beginning phases of building a network and coming together, how you worked together to secure either advocacy or funding or support, or how your on the ground project really worked to address what you were seeing on the ground. And so we want to see it from all different levels and all different stages of development, and you know, how that impacted the resilience of the people and the nature in the region. And so please take a look at our website and John, if you have any questions, I think that's what I'll talk with that.
Do you want to provide any updates about the leadership at Chicago?
Yeah, yes. We were very sad to Jim entering his phase of retirement, and we're happy for him. And Elizabeth Kessler is still chair. Her term is done at the end of this year. Victoria Wittig has stepped into the role of vice chair, and we've welcomed some new at-large steering committee members this year. Sergio Vargas, Emily from Illinois Environmental Council, Emily Russig from Open Lands, and Bill Nicodemus from Urban Rivers. And going into the fall, we're going to get a call for nominations for steering committee partners, fill the role of executive secretary, as well as to look to fill the chair and some at-large members at the end of the year. Also, as you know, our Green Vision Initiative leads teams rely on a very active membership, as well as help to kind of support the lead. And so I'm working to with Ted and Patty and all the other co-chairs to try to find ways to identify and foster new leadership. And in many ways, this can be an opportunity to bring in some younger professionals who want to learn about how to get involved and actually really provide the support that you need to do. So if you have anyone that you might want to let me know about, or you yourself are interested, and it's not only specific to this team, but to other teams, please let me know, and we'd be happy to kind of sit down with that person or you and talk about what that would mean in the play. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Lauren. So just so you know, this is one of two in-person virtual hybrid meetings that we're going to have this year. Our next meeting is in July. I'm actually going to be out of the country. It'll be virtual, and Matt kind of taking the lead on that. And then there's going to be one in the fall. That will be in person. I think to kind of dovetail with Congress, and with Congress is being held, we're going to try and have that meeting down in the Calumet region, working with the Wetlands Initiative maybe to showcase some of the work that they've been doing down there. Still kind of working the details of that and send those out as I know what they are, because I don't yet. Because that's months old. And that's kind of it for updates with this kind of the formal part of this committee. And so I'm going to go ahead and get the presentation started. However long you guys can stay here today and continue to chat with each other, because really that's kind of what this is about today, is actually having an opportunity to get to know other people. Take a longer walk to see kind of what's going on in Greenbelt a little bit up close and personal, to be able to see some of the stages of the restoration, because it has it's been an ongoing process for multi years that Dan are going to talk about. And then, you know, any questions that we can answer. And if you happen to come in, saw the big machine in the back parking lot, that is the district's new forestry mower, and I thought it would be fun if you had an opportunity to take a look at it. And unfortunately, our manager of landscape ecology had some personal things kind of interfere. Come here and talk to you guys in person about that machine, but with each of us, we'll try and answer as many questions as we can. Just so you know, yeah.
Can we take it for us then? I'm serious. I really want to try that.
It's video.
Oh, okay.
Because it is pretty amazing. And I'm not even a licensed operator, so I don't think they let me on it either. Too bad, I know. All right, I am gonna share the screen. I'm hoping, you know what, I think I have to turn it into the PowerPoint before. Linda, There we go. Okay, now let's see if I can actually share the screen.
It's fine.
I know, but it's not up on the Zoom yet.
Oh,
We want to make sure everybody on Zoom can see it too. Share. All right. Can everybody who's on Zoom, can somebody on Zoom just give me a heads up and let me know that they can see the presentation?
Looks great.
You can see it.
Okay, cool. Thank you. We're putting down some curtains here. And I'm gonna turn it over to Ken to see what you're. I'm just gonna turn it over to Ken and Dan.
All right, thank you all very much for being here in person, and Ken and I are very excited to talk about all the wonderful progress that has been made. That's 13 years of service. And I was.
Pointed at.
Yeah.
Did work before.
Yeah, technical difficulties. Oh. Let's try making this active and see if that works. Oh, I know what we're gonna do. Over there? No, okay, here, you take that. I'll drive. You just tell me when. Speak up.
Very fortunate to be on the platinum level so far. And this is just part of our team, but all of our group of volunteers have been calls, and this is, it takes a village and it really shows up. So, all your chance. Next slide, please. I want to start with a really basic overview of the site. So this is 2023 of Greenbelt and all of its current parcels. We have a total of 595 acres across all these units that are mostly contiguous, but just separated by acres. The first parcel was acquired in 1971, and the district acquired multiple units, small chunks, all of them until 1990. And the cultural center that we're in today was initiated in 1984 and completed in 2000 with additions such as the one we're in now. And one of the main features that really balance the site are our watersheds. So right here, Green Bay Road, that is the watershed division. So west of there is the Chicago River watershed, and this is really the headwaters of the Chicago River. So it's really important logically. Then everywhere to the east flows into Lake Michigan, and we're only about a mile from Lake Michigan, believe it or not. So Ken can talk a little bit more that is logically words, but it sets Greenbelt a really important area ecologically in Michigan. And one reason that Greenbelt is so important too is because it's in a heavily urbanized area in Chicago. And next slide. I'd like to just quickly look through a few historical areas just to give you a sense of how the area used to be agricultural, and then a lot of development started happening pretty fast. So next slide, and can hopefully make it every 10 seconds to get an idea. And so you can see there's definitely a lot of agriculture tool. And Greenbelt, especially this parcel, you can, if you go out today, you might see some pillars. Those are old zoning pillars that were like planned neighborhoods. And I'm happy they never actually happened because there's a lot of quality. And this here is a habitat classification map. So Ken and our ecologists and our GIS specialists have put together kind of all of our plant communities. They're all our observers. And so to show you where we have, for instance, our orange areas here are prairie, shrubland habitat, meadows, woodlands, etc. But one of the really important aspects about Greenbelt that I would talk about is that it's a really good mosaic. And along these thresholds, that's where a lot of diversity is defined. And so this is what I'm really proud of and thinking about what this means for the bird habitat all on the state of plants.
Hi, everyone, I'm Ken Flick. So Dan had mentioned some of the cultural history of the site, going back to the 1920s. Part of Waukegan, this was part of the land speculation. So if you think of Wolf Road Prairie in Cook County, where they subdivided lots, quarter acres, sidewalks, even fire hydrants. Well, Greenbelt went through that same history. A developer named Bartok, 1923, I believe, planted this entire area. Dan mentioned these concrete monuments that are out there that signify the intersection of all the roads. Well, then this stopped. So all of those lots, all of those lot owners faded away in history and disappeared. Basically, because there were no landowners on the site, this area had relatively very little disturbance. In fact, light grazing, very little cultivation. Because of that light footprint on this area, we still have a lot of significant features out of it here in the forest reserve. 20 acres of the 594 acres are considered remnant plant communities. Mostly they're confined to the edges of the wetlands out there, because probably in the 1960s, the buffalo invaded and occupied much of the area, but due to the fluctuating water levels, the buffalo wasn't as pervasive and thick in those areas. As the buckthorn developed, as the native shrubs also expanded, it became a very valuable shrub and bird habitat. You should probably look in this area. That's one of the rarest communities for wildlife. It's a transitory kind of thing. It's depending upon the frequency of fire and also how extensive the shrubs get over time. So it's a very delicate balance, but with our restoration goals at Greenbelt is to maintain that shrubland bird habitat, and that's one of our biggest challenges. We'll go into that in more detail. Because of these wetland pockets, we have 3 endangered species. These temporary transitory things, they come and go, they cover large areas, but as succession moves along, they disappear. One of the highlights is golden sedge, grass looking plant. It's very abundant up here. It's interesting. I think it's on the same glacial moraine as Chicago Botanic Garden. It's also the youngest landscape in. So this is a pioneer species that we find just after the glacier seeds. It's one of the first plants that come in. Lo and behold, it's out in Greenbelt. So through restoration, with the buckthorn removal, golden sedge has appeared. Along the fringes, yellow stargrass, Indian paintbrush, purple milkweed. This has a large population. It's a known population of snake. Again, because it hasn't been plowed, it hasn't been herbicided, or at least agricultural intensity land use. And the shrubland bird habitat, that's yellow-breasted chat, which stops here, doesn't nest, but every year it comes back through restoration management. We get that brown thrashers, catbirds, fluting warblers, warbling white-eyed vireos. So these are things that are moving in, and actually in light of climate change, this probably will be more important because a lot of those southern birds are moving north into this area. And as Dan mentioned too, Lake Michigan is just a mile away. So every migration period, these birds are flying at night, they're over the lake, and here's this green oasis. So these birds are flying into this. Next.
Can you come closer to the
Sure.
computer so that people can hear you better?
Okay.
Thank you. Probably, yeah.
Okay.
So,
I can.
okay. There you go.
Thank you.
Oh. Let me just. So the land sat idle from the 1920s. If you recall, the 1939 aerial photograph showed this as basically a treeless area, except for some of the small oak copse, some oak woodlands out here. But beginning in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, the buckthorn just expanded without fire, with the seed source nearby. Buckthorn covered almost every acre of Greenbelt Forest Reserve District, 95 or 97%. The only areas that weren't covered were the wetlands that were just too wet for buckthorn. Glossy buckthorn was not a problem here, fortunately. So that's our management effort. We had soil that was intact, remnant plant communities nearby in these wet mesic zones. So how do we go about restoring this area? And actually with Jim Anderson here, his funding to support this restoration work. And 13 years. So all of these grants were major players. Generally, they required a 50-50 split. The coastal program, I think we've had 3 grants over this period of time, and working directly with Fish and Wildlife Service is wonderful. Sustain Our Great Lakes provided valuable funding. Dan will go into some of the other ones, but Audubon Great Lakes too is an important player in recognition of the work here at Greenbelt, and also most importantly, connecting the neighborhoods, because this is a very urban preserve. Engaging the nearby neighbors is important. I also want to, backtrack too. It's kind of interesting in the restoration work. I think a lot of us, I don't want to say cheap, but we go after the low-hanging fruit of restoration work, which are the easiest to restore, where you get the biggest bang for your buck. Well, Greenbelt is notoriously difficult because you have 40, 50 years of buckthorn invasion. You can cut it down, but by then so many of the native plants and animals under those buckthorn have disappeared. So it's a long going process. You don't just mow it down and good stuff comes up. So we're facing that conundrum right now and making great progress.
About forward and then the understory floor really being depleted, that means that we don't have fuels to actually burn in some of these areas. So a large part is actually seeding and finding fuels that we can burn pretty readily. And in areas where it's just completely buckthorn that we mow repeatedly, sometimes the root systems are so voracious that we can't get anything to establish. And so we're thinking that in the future, we need to be more aggressive on that front in terms of respout control, which we will also talk about. But in terms of controlled burning, I'm really happy to say that we had a burn with volunteers this past fall, and it was within the inner trail, and what was that, about 45 acres? Yeah, so that was, Greenbelt hasn't seen a burn in years prior. It was exciting to me, especially with volunteers, to get to know the wellhead side as much as. Something else I want to talk about is the deer population. So a healthy carrying capacity for deer is approximately 20 to 30 deer per square mile. In this area, we have 75. So we need to think about deer management. I'm talking to a wildlife ecologist, Patty, you're talking to too. So on that front, we try to put in as many deer fencing enclosures or exclosures rather that we can to save some of the more conservative plant species. But a funny story, Ken and I were putting up fencing a few weeks ago, and a herd of 12 deer just kind of stared us down as we were putting them up. So we just have to do it, especially in our areas where volunteers are working, because there's a lot of remnant prairie vegetation over there, such as boy cocoons, wood foxes, good stuff that we want to save. So deer management, we have to do that.
Each time we clear the buckthorn, we have seeded these areas. A diverse seed mix. What we're trying to do is maintain a low stature, so we don't want to plant the big blue stemmed Indian grass, which would provide fuel, but then that would kind of counter against the shrubland bird habitat that we're trying to maintain. So there's that delicate balance there. So the lower right here shows the native shrub planting. He planted over 300 native shrubs to replace the non-native buckthorn that we removed out there. Each shrub costs 20, 25 bucks a pop. They're expensive and over 500 acres. They kind of get lost in the landscape. It's not like seeding where you buy a pound of seed and you have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of seeds. So planting those shrubs is critical. It's in the process. Unfortunately, they're not doing that well here. They're not spreading. So getting a shrub community type to replace the buckthorn has been challenging. Of course, we measure this in decades, if not even longer too. So we have to be patient here. Meanwhile, we have to control the non-native shrubs. So sometimes it means cutting down the hazelnut that we plant or the dogwoods and viburnums. But as long as the good system is alive, it's going well. And the seeding, each time we clear areas, we do seed 2 years after the resprout control. And there's something about the soil type. We're trying to find that sweet mix that works well here. We don't create a lot of C4 highly flammable grasses community, but something that balances a lower, less intensity fire. So we allow the shrubs to maintain themselves. And the invasive plant control, every weed in the Chicago wilderness has been here at Greenbelt too. It's all here. One of the grants that we received in NIFWIF, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, was the pass-through. They're allowing us to spend money on retreating areas that we've already addressed with buckthorn removal. So these aren't brand new projects, but it's revisiting some of those areas. And of course, with invasive work or any restoration, as we know, it's not just go and do the project and walk away. So there are decades of follow-up with invasives. We have a contractor now contributing lots of hours to go after every season with every cattail out there, and crown vetch and buckthorn resprouts. The resprouts are most challenging. And, I think there's an image that shows some of the challenges.
Oh, there we go. All right, so we kind of already talked about it. We need to burn these areas, but we can't if it's all buckthorn, and the response is just.
Sure. You know, our contracts for buckthorn removal require 95% kill of everything that's been cut. So in the wintertime, the mowing, the shear cutting happens. Herbicide during the entire next growing season, and I can honestly say there's 95% kill. But when you revisit those same areas 2 years later, you look, where did all these things come from? Often they're seedlings, often they're resprouts that are delayed by the stumps, delayed from the cutting. So what I'm thinking is maybe we need a 2 or 3 year contract for these buckthorn removal. As Dan mentioned, there's so little ground fuel that you can't sweep a fire through there. So fire isn't necessarily a tool in managing resprouts, and maybe never, as long as, unless you can do it every 2 or 3 years. But here at Greenbelt, we've had to take different approaches. The lower right picture there, that shows where every buckthorn stem that's 2 or 3 years old was cut with a brush cutter and dabbed with herbicide on the cut stump. Very effective, very costly. One method. Another one in the center picture shows in the wintertime, we just mow these things down. Can't herbicide, and there's hundreds of stems per square meter throughout this entire site, but at least we give that herbaceous fuel a chance to express itself. And if we have a good burn season that spring or the fall, we can carry a fire through there. The picture in the lower left shows fire does work. It maintains woody plants in a herbaceous kind of spread. As long as you can burn 2 or 3 years, you can control those things. Now, keep in mind, we're also trying to maintain the shrub and bird habitat as well. So we can control the resprouts, but then we diminish the value for the shrub and bird habitat. So that's kind of the challenge in this plant community, or this community, Chicago region wide, if not, well, not worldwide. Maintaining these temporary successional communities that have a suite of plants and animals that live in them And not tip the scale in one direction or another, but just to reach that, proper balance. Especially for the species of greatest conservation concern of those state listed species. So far, Greenbelt is working, over the 13 years, we've kind of managed about 40-acre blocks at a time. Dan this past year took on over 100-acre garden clearing areas, so. Kind of what needs to be done and what shouldn't be done. All right, well, in the upper right-hand corner, Audubon Great Lakes. We retained their services very early on to develop a stewardship group here. We had difficulty maintaining a volunteer stewardship group in this area. Audubon Great Lakes, Daniel Suarez in particular, organized community groups, went knocking on doors and went to the local meetings, scouts, church, Rotary clubs, and said, hey, there's this preserve here. Now, in the past, 10, 15 years ago, Greenbelt was basically a trail through a corridor of buckthorn. So there wasn't a lot of use here. The views weren't expansive. You couldn't see around the corner. So I think there was some distance that the community felt from this preserve. But as restoration proceeded, as the ability to look around corners and see the landscape, that increased. And that also brought greater awareness in the neighborhood. So the volunteer effort picked up quite remarkably. And Daniel, every month, we had brush cutting parties and volunteer work days and seed collecting, a lot of young children during the summertime. And over time, a core group of people became attached to this, and now they meet every month and contribute thousands of hours over time. Dan, anything else to add?
I really want to say it's really important to invest resources in areas where you have dedicated volunteer bases. And our steward, a volunteer steward, Dawn, is incredibly dedicated. She was a volunteer monitor for Audubon in the past, so she's really about the birds. She tells me whenever she sees something cool, like an owl out and about, and vice versa. And it's really important looking forward to have her as my eyes and ears. I want her to retire so she can do that more often, but it's a really good partnership to maintain. And she has a group of probably 15 volunteers that show up every month with her. And they have a wonderful time. And it's really important to make break times for s'mores as well during our birth parties. And I did that figure alone when I was just doing some grant applications and talking to our stewardship ecologist. I'm like, how many volunteer hours do we have? She said over 2,000 since 2019. So this is a really dedicated, engaged base, and I couldn't be more pleased with them. And I will kind of highlight the area. If you're interested in seeing that area today, we're on the east side. If you go to the west side, there's that entrance you can follow and take a right at the fork. You can kind of see where the volunteers have been working, and that's the area where they currently don't think that's more free beyond that span of vegetation going on. And they've managed them too. They've done a real good job clearing out dogwoods, buckthorn, and they do some of the walnuts that are kind of encroaching on that area. Fantastic. We love our volunteers. And that's it. The one other thing I mentioned were the 100 acres that Ken mentioned that I've been working on. So that's with a number of grants that Bart and I applied for. Contractors have cleared approximately 84 acres, and there have also been 28 acres cleared by our staff, and then another 9 or 10 acres cleared by volunteers. So a total of 120 acres in this past year alone. So we've got a ways to go, but it's working. Thank you.
Well, this is a really site for, as Ken said, for the birds. It's also along the Chicago Flyway. And we recently partnered with the station up on the roof here. It has taken a long time to actually get it functional. We finally get data from it. But so there's no big news about it, but at least it's here and we can start to track the birds that are coming through if they have tags. The number of tagged birds is kind of exponentially increasing as the technology is being adopted sort of across the region. So that's pretty exciting. And then the other thing about this project and kind of the series of projects that have been implemented over time is we have got a lot of pushback from the community. When you came in along Green Bay Road, and you may have noticed on the other side that it's pretty open, maybe it looks a little naked. And 2 years ago, was that 2 years ago? We really mowed it, just cleared it. Took it almost down to the ground. There was almost nothing left because it was primarily buffalo. And as we got a lot of things. We got a lot of comments on our website. There was a lot of public pushback. And even though this was an interesting site because what we typically do when we're going to have a clearing project like that, we know there's going to be a big, generally send out letters, a quarter to a half a mile around the preserve. Just geofence it and kind of get those addresses and send out letters. And we did that. But because this is such a high traffic area, it wasn't necessarily those residents who were calling us. It was all the people who drive by, on a daily basis or a weekly basis. And one of the things, we always get some pushback. You may have heard this comment from the general public yourselves, and that is, you're a forest preserve. Why are you cutting down the forest? And it's because many people don't distinguish buckhorn from any other kind of tree, so they think we're literally cutting down our forests. And the other things that a lot of people don't seem to understand is that Lake County in particular, woodlands of especially oak ecosystem type woodlands, those are our major habitats. Those are the historically, we had more woodlands than a lot of other places throughout the Chicago wilderness area. And so there's been an opportunity for us to learn better how to engage the public in some of these management activities that we're doing, especially when they're that visible along a major road. Comment that we heard pretty frequently about that was people were afraid that what we were doing, it was getting cleared. They thought we were starting a construction project, a really big construction project. And it's because it is kind of, in the middle of this urban landscape, there are industrial activities that do go on kind of interspersed with some of the preserved boundaries. And so that to me was a really big thing too, is to be able to allay people's fears and then try and learn how to be more proactive in our communications at the start of a big project like this, especially when it is in such a highly visible. So just from my perspective, those are a couple of other things that we've learned through the implementation of the top.
Thank you. Becky Collins has a question. Can you unmute yourself, Becky, and ask?
Yeah, thank you. This is a great project overview. I'm sorry I'm not there to see it in person today. I did have a few questions. I guess I'll maybe just list them off one by one and then see what the, I don't know, best way to respond is. But I was wondering for like the shrubland units, where you're trying to promote shrubland bird habitat, are those areas like the photo that we're seeing where you're hoping to have like grass prairie matrix interspersed with shrubs, or are you looking for kind of like 100% shrub cover? Just wondering how you're kind of defining that shrubland bird habitat. That was one question. And then the second question was, I did see in one of the slides you had been mowing the buckthorn and you had some fairly thick slash on the ground from mowing. I'm wondering when you're seeding these areas, how long you're waiting for that to break down? Like what stage in restoration you were trying to seed?
Great questions. I'm gonna let Ken take both of those.
You know, the shards from the forestry mowing were a concern, and we've delayed seeding sometimes 2 or 3 years to allow the decomposition of that material.
Okay.
In more recent contracts, we kind of anticipated how much material would be on the ground, so we said, no forestry mowing, let's shear that and burn it as brush piles. So, you know, that was important to consider, and I think over time we're getting better at gauging based on the above ground biomass, how much is that going to relate to on the ground after chipping.
I also am going to add that the forestry mower that we have recently purchased, it's got, you know, just a huge amount of horsepower, and it's got a different system for shredding the material, and we are actually getting a finer shred than we typically do with a standard Fecon mower. And so for some areas, especially where we're not doing follow-up herbicide, that's going to decompose for us faster, we think, and we'll be able to seed into it a lot sooner than we would if we were using a Fecon mower.
Okay. So you're trying different attachments and then also asking contractors to burn the slash in brush piles. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we typically don't burn the slash. We leave it in place.
Okay.
Yeah, the shrubland birds is challenging.
Yeah.
You have species that require large thickets, half hectare, a hectare in size. And then you have things like goldfinches and field sparrows that like a mosaic. So we're still figuring that out. In fact, I think the whole science of what are the habitat requirements of these shrubland birds. Some need continuous dogwood thickets. Others, like brown thrashers, want that prairie grassland interspersal. You know, the beauty of Greenbelt is it's 500 acres. The beauty of any large site is you provide habitat niches throughout. So we're still in those very early stages. As we control the thistle, teasel, reed canary grass, as we get herbaceous material to grow, we're going to play with fire and let fire dictate the shrub densities. Burn on cool days so we don't top kill all the shrubs. So that's our plan. Audubon Great Lakes did some studies out here to study the different densities of shrubs and which species inhabit those areas. So it's kind of a site by site. What happens in Orland grasslands is different than up here in Greenbelt. But again, it's those most rare species that will continue to decline unless we figure this out fast or have large sites where there is a mosaic.
Okay, thank you very much.
I've got a question. I saw in the photo that you were using 5-gallon shrubs. Have you like played around with different like bare root to see what, or that it just, I'm curious on what you've tried shrub wise.
There is the input from the group there too.
Yeah, so for us, we have tried sizes. So just so that we can do that. So we had a question about the pot size that we use for the restoration especially the shrubs. We've played around with different sizes of pots, everything from, you know, kind of a small gallon to the 5-gallon you saw. And that really does influence the cost of the material. We've worked with Casey at Possibility Place, and he's got these kind of stepped pots that he's been growing things in that are smaller than the typical ones that we use. The roots get established very, very quickly because of the way that it's formed. And he's finding that he gets the size root ball that he's looking for kind of as a 5-gallon, but in a 2-gallon pot and much more quickly. And so for the past couple of years, we've been using those in some places. Those seem to be working pretty well. By and large, for both our trees and our shrubs, we have found that we have much better, or much lower mortality, much higher survivorship if we buy larger containers. And so that's where we're kind of going, because that seems to be a sweet spot. And it's especially because we invest a lot of time and money, especially at places like Greenbelt. When we install those shrubs, they're all getting deer fencing around them. And that's where kind of our largest expense and time is coming. And so we're focusing on high survivorship rather than a cheap installation cost. And then if anybody else has a different experience, that's great.
There's one more question from Lake Schulte online.
Hi, yeah, you mentioned the communication issues with the area that you took buckthorn out and it looked really bare. What kind of strategies are you guys looking to implement in the future to kind of not have so many of those issues, like signage near the area where you're clearing, or more outreach to a bigger expanse of the community so it's not just right next to the preserve? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, where we're doing things that are going to be much more visible, like Greenbelt, we would expand the area that we're geofencing in order to send out letters. But I think the biggest thing that we could have done a little bit more proactively is put large signs on more of the boundaries where we were doing the restoration. When we first started the project, we only put them in 1 or 2 places, and they weren't, I think there were areas where people just didn't see them when they were traveling. So that's another really big thing. We've done a lot more outreach in our Horizons magazine, which comes out quarterly. It is pretty much a paper magazine that's mailed to many, but not all of the residents throughout the county. And so not everybody's subscribed to it. And so we also have that available online. I think we've also learned that the web presence is much more important than we had really maybe thought about it, when we're sort of committed to refreshing those project updates a lot more frequently, especially for the higher visibility sites. And we have a way for people to send us email and make comments and ask questions on our website. And we just recently have paid for a service that allows us to get it translated into multiple languages. So people can go in and ask questions in any language that they want to, and it gets translated. And we are now, that is now also being answered real time by a chatbot feature. And that also is happening in multiple languages. So we're trying to figure out as many different ways as possible to engage with the residents of the county. And if you have any more ideas, let us know, because I'm sure we're missing something. Yes.
Have there been mistakes made on this preserve in the last 20 years that provided good learning lessons?
Oh.
The sprouts issue, and for many areas, say, I wish we cut the buckthorn, and unfortunately, kind of boom sprayed everything and started from scratch. we were hoping there were more remnant species here and there, and in the end, didn't see a whole lot. So it may have been more cost efficient and time efficient to clear the slate early on and get not only seedlings of buck garnet generated, but also these delayed resprout treatments. So that would be, and that's,
it sounds like you're trying to take care of that by changing from the Fecon mower to the shears, so that you get a better control of the resprouts, not so much the seedlings. And then I was gonna ask, on the west side, work you did there along the ComEd lines, did that not respond as well as we were thinking?
well, that responded very well. You know, initially, after clear, it looks great in 2 or 3 years. You know, like on the other side of Green Bay Road, it's one of the most expansive shooting star displays that we have in the county. And it's interesting with the buckthorn, we have a lot of spring ephemerals, the yellow stargrass, shooting star, commandra. Those things persisted under the buckthorn overstory 40, 50 years, but June, July, August, it became too shady for those things. So the prairie dock and the gentians disappeared. So we do have quite a showy and long list of spring ephemerals out there. So we don't want to lose those, and that's the dilemma. But with time, it's more and more buckthorn there too, because we can't burn. So now we're following up with basal bark treatments and foliar spraying as well. Just a long process.
Yeah, Ted.
I'm wondering, so I'm curious about the funding and the positions of, and the positions of the prairie in the watershed and how you're sort of straddling 2 watersheds. Has that been a challenge at all? Because of the geographical differentiations, or can you use the preserve as sort of one whole place and apply the funding to both sides, and then it's not an issue?
I'd say it depends on the opportunity. So the coastal program, the grant that we just got, they really wanted the work to be focused in the Lake Michigan watershed. But in my case, they allowed some of the match to be done on the Chicago River watershed. So I think it really depends on the opportunity and their exact goals with that.
So historic watershed allowed us to use the Lake Michigan funding.
So you've had success with that historic watershed argument, because that's been a hard argument to practice.
Depends on the funder.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, some funders allow it, especially fish and wildlife, and then others don't. The coastal programs are strictly like this.
Yeah, it probably was a bit of a stretch for them to allow the match outside of the Lake Michigan watershed, but we were able to do it. I think because a lot of it was follow-up as opposed to initial, right? Yeah.
I want to read out, Becky had a comment. Buckthorn. She said we have found 3 to 5 years of buckthorn resprout treatment, herbicide, and fire disease for the
Yeah, that's something that we, I think, have kind of really been noticing a lot lately. And I can't tell if it's because winters are, a little harder to predict maybe than they have been in the past. So at places where we've done kind of the cut and stump treatment, the initial like a year or 2 after that looks really good. But then 3 years later, maybe 4 years later, there's a lot of resprouts, and it is stump resprouts. It's not from seed. And I don't know if it's just the roots are persistent and they're coming up from the roots and we wouldn't be able to catch that anyway, or if the initial treatment might not have been as good, or uptake wasn't as good as it could have been because it was either too cold or the snow was too high, or, there's just so many variables in that initial treatment that it's hard to tell exactly what's going on. So I agree, Becky, that the follow-up has to be longer term than just within the year of buckthorn removal and treatment. And that's a challenge because that means that we have to really rethink kind of how we structure the contracts that we have and how we restructure kind of that follow-up treatment and how long we think we're going to have to do that for, because, we're treating a couple hundred acres a year, and that follow-up, kind of that cumulative follow-up over time just becomes a larger part of the budget process. And how to strategize then the funding for that is a really big issue at the moment. Josh.
Is that just a cost saving measure, or was have steps block them for a slab? I'm sorry, I missed that.
So it's a great question. So where Josh Kemp from Stantec is asking if anybody is seeing any benefit to just using basal bark treatment and leaving the skeleton of the buckthorn in place, which I think in a lot of places might be a big challenge because it's pretty thick. And so applying just a basal bark to the whole thing might be tricky. But is there any benefit to leaving those skeletons in place? And, I don't have any experience with that, but if anybody else does, I think it's a great question. Oh, Nick.
So we have done some of that, but not on like the mature buckthorn and honeysuckle. So we've cleared it initially. And then we'll introduce fire, and then anything that wasn't top killed by the fire, and then we'll go in with basal bark in non-remnant areas like recreated prairies, things like that. But it's not the initial, because usually there's like a zone of death around it. If you have remnant species, you're kind of, depending on how tight the buckthorn is, you can end up killing the remnant stuff.
Can you explain further what basal bark treatment is? I don't actually curious.
So you would use typically Garlon 4, so it's an oil base. You wouldn't need to pre-cut the buckthorn. You would just, or honeysuckle or whatever it is, you would just actually apply it to the trunk.
And I know that TNC out at Nachusa Grasslands has been doing a lot of basal bark treatment as opposed to cut and stump treatment. But I don't know kind of longer term follow-up benefits. But I imagine that at least, for there be some habitat for birds, et cetera, that might not exist otherwise. At least refugia from predators, et cetera.
At Greenbelt, there was there were just solid buckthorn consisting of 40-year-old trees and 3-year-old growth. So I think density and age class too, and isolated big trees, then top killing them with basal treatment would be an efficient way and effective way. But you're surrounded by saplings of another age where the stem densities are so high that basal treating each of those. It's timely and it can be very expensive too, and not that systemically top killing system as well.
Becky, oh, I'm sorry.
So one final comment on that is at the Botanic Garden, we have some conservative vine species, Lemnisceras, Diosphoria, and when we basal bark the green ash stands and black ash sapling stands, we find that the vines actually use the skeletons and those populations have been increased. So a little bit more of a niche thing, but where you have those conservative vines, we've seen actually great results from the basal bark. But I agree with not doing it in remnant prairies, and when there's so much density of buckthorn, it might not be the best.
So you've got a couple of things, that are butting heads here. You're trying to establish or maintain like a shrubland but you're trying to control buckthorn, and then you're also trying to maintain ephemerals and reintroduce a matrix, right? That's, you know, those two, all four of those are kind of butting heads. And have you like kind of ever thought about, I know you said you don't want to introduce C4 grass species, but have you thought about potentially using something, I don't know, what would have been the cover the fuel matrix here originally? So it's a two-part question.
We've thought of it. Poverty oats grass. It's what we think, something small. There's some rare panic grasses that are only 3 inches tall out there. You know, the remnants suggest that it was a low stature, you know, it's only 9,000 years old too, so that's the other thing. And Lake Michigan is so close, so, you know, we have no example. Soul Prairie, I guess, is the closest, but that's a lot of careful introduction.
Also, railroad records of block.
Well,
I just,
yeah. Right.
Shaw Prairie.
Shaw Prairie, yeah, the Lake Forest open land sites. You know, it's interesting, when a pond was dug on site back in the 70s, they planted Indian grass as the boost them, and that grass is just kind of moving into the restoration areas. So ultimately, we'll have lots of fuel, and unless we stop that monoculture of grass that's moving in. You know, I'm hoping we planted a whole lot of switchgrass this past winter, Panicum virgatum. It doesn't form a dense sod, it provides a fuel matrix. It's sometimes temporary. Maybe that'll kind of balance that need for fire, but not intense fire kind of thing. Or bulldoze all those conservative low stature things.
Ken, I'm wondering if you've had conversations with Linda. I know, you know, these are opinions, but when I was with her at the preserve, at Open Lands Lakeshore Preserve, she swore up and down like I think it's a betony overseed, tamps down those larger C4 grasses. Is that true? And have you tried that?
That's what I've been talking to people about, and so the areas that are predominantly Indian grass, will so sparks in those areas, and then also introducing wood beds to try and.
It's very true.
Yeah,
Okay. You visit old restorations, you see the difference. You visit remnants where those species are part of the whole community is just this tall. So that's the dynamic that achieve out.
That's what Henry's got, Becky.
Oh, I was just gonna mention to the conversation about the basil barking. So Will County Forest Preserves has done a lot of work using basil barking. I'm gonna post a link to Julie's blog about it in the chat. And we took a tour of some of their sites last year. And she had found that it was a much more effective, cost-effective way of treating buckthorn. So if anyone is interested in that, I definitely would recommend reaching out to Julie Mason with Will County Forest Preserves, because they've done a lot of different applications using basil barking and kind of trying to figure out how to use that technique. So that's my note.
Great, thank you. So if you didn't hear that, Becky was talking about experience with basil barking at Will County and the work that Julie Mason has been doing with that. And she's got a blog post that I actually have read. It's a really good post. And she's going to put a link in the chat. Maybe we can grab it and we can email that out, because I think it's a good read. And Nick had another question.
Yeah, so the second part to my first question about the fuels, we have the same problem in multiple preserves. We have, you know, short, non-dense fuels. We can't burn it because we can't introduce new species on site, just for our seed policy. And I kind of have a feeling that we're probably going to have to introduce something in terms of like a cover crop. It being a native one, for example, maybe side oats or something like that, that you might be able to get something established temporarily. You might take a hit on the ephemerals, but then you can get fuel to establish, and then, you know, maybe give it a decade or more, and then kind of let the shrubs move back in. And thinking of it kind of in a multi-decade long process. We have taken on wetland complexes similar to this, where we have very sensitive bird species that like the structure. But what we've done is we've set aside refugia in one spot. So we said, this is the spot, we're not gonna tackle it until we've gotten the other areas kind of stabilized. And so have you thought about using one area to say, we're gonna lean heavy into the grass cover in here? I know you said you're not gonna do that, but I'm considering in some of these areas that we may need to introduce something just to get fuel established, then maybe pull back and then let the shrubs can come back in. And in our case, what we were battling is cattails, that the birds liked, right? And we were able to, on the ends, establish burreed basically, and then the birds then started utilizing the burreed, and then we started tackling the other areas of that wetland, which did take decades to do, so.
Final comment from me and the work of the Botanic Garden from Jim Steppen, who's managed the site before I was. He focused a lot on sedges versus grasses. So colonial sedges like Carex pallida, Titanica, and other sort of savanna, Sowellii, Buxbaumii, carried fire so much better than our rough and ready grass mixes. So this is something I'm learning now and adjusting my seed mixes. I used to think that the whole preserve is Carex tenera, and why is it like that? And it turns out it carries so much fire, or it carries fire effectively. I think that has a lot of benefits to the restoration of the forest. And I just learned that, you know, this past couple of years with Virginia wild rye, I thought that would carry fire. I would use that, and but that's something in your restoration ecologist.
Yeah, I agree about the stages of this. You know, we're trying to protect that shrubland bird habitat. Well, not doing anything is probably the best way to protect that shrubland bird habitat. But we're going to tip the scale because the buckthorn's going to gain a stronger foothold there. It's almost like reforestation. Plant trees, let them grow. Well, can't burn because you're going to top kill the trees. So what kind of cover crop is necessary to get those trees established so they can withstand fire 10, 15 years later, or cool fire sooner? Maybe the same story was true for shrubs. Control the weeds, create some kind of fuel matrix, burn it, and then stop and let the shrubs that have persisted for that time, hopefully that buckthorn, to expand and not burn it for 10 years or so. Meanwhile, shrubs expand, but you still have that balance with the good fire that created that mosaic.
So are there any other comments or questions from people who are attending online? I don't see any. So we're gonna go ahead and stop sharing the screen and close down the Zoom, because we're only 15 minutes short of our typical meeting time. I'm really glad you were able to join us virtually. Next time, I hope you are able to come in person. That's because I think we'll have an opportunity to really talk. When the meeting is over, we'll go outside, see a few things actually in person. I see a question where the next meeting is. The next meeting is going to be in July, and that one's going to be virtual. The fourth quarter meeting is going to take place in the fall. That one will be in person, and we're hoping to have that somewhere down in the Calumet region with the Wetlands Institute and some of the projects that they've been working on down there. Thanks, Mark. We appreciate it. I'll pass that along to Dan and Ken. It was a great presentation, and I'm really glad you were able to come. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you later.